Hello and welcome back to Systems of Existence. It's been quite a while, but if you follow me on Instagram, you know that I've been really active on there and have been shifting my presence there, I guess. Yeah, it's been an interesting ride, but I enjoy it. I want to, bring a little bit more fun and excitement into also the content that I share, but also just, sometimes my sad rising is coming through and it's like we have to approach everything with a sense of humor, but then also from an entertainment level. Anyways, so if you would like to dive deeper into that, go over to my Instagram and let me know how you feel about that. Change in direction, I'm a lot more present there, which feels really good. And I also hosted an amazing free workshop for the eclipse. If you missed it, no worries, there will be another one because I enjoyed it so much, for the full moon in Aries, because that's going to be a very significant one. I know I always say that, but it's really true because Mars will be on the opposite side of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction point. The moon, so basically the full moon, is conjunct Chiron in Aries. I mean, there's so much that I could already share about this full moon. I want to say it's an eclipse, but it's not. But I mean, the nodes are still in Aries, so it feels like an eclipse, but it's not. But it's the first lunation after the eclipse cycle, which is also significant. And if you are curious about these free workshops, first of all, it's a gathering that we all come together. And this one specifically now, I'm really focusing on also the gene keys of it, the human design aspect of it. So we go deep into where it's located in the body and how you can work with that. And if you are curious and want to join, then sign up below. I will share the link down below in the show notes somewhere, so you can sign up, but you will also find me promoting and inviting you to, on Instagram. So definitely be sure to jump over to Magic Kathy Official, and I will, shine a light on what's going on there, because it's going to be a really amazing really amazing workshop, and I'm excited for it because the last one was already such a blast. So many of you attended, and also if you can't attend live, you will get a replay. So that's really valuable because you can always go into what we are going to dive into, and because it's a lot to digest. It's definitely a lot to digest, and a lot of you wanted to have the replay so you can learn in your own pace, which is totally fine. I will also have some room for Q&As if you would like to know more about your personal transits and all the good stuff. Then definitely join us. I always like to see you live. But that's not the topic of this podcast, because today I have an amazing guest. I have Kari Hone on here, and we also talked about the gene keys and astrology and human design and all the good things. And it's been really amazing because we dive deeper into the iChing actually, and the aspect also of, or like the axis of Libra and Aries, and also Capricorn and Cancer, which obviously are the talk of the town for all of us right now. So this is really an illuminating conversation. It's been a while that we actually recorded it, but I felt really called to upload it now. Again, because we also talk about the equinox portals and the Aries Libra axis and how that's located in human design and in the iChing and in the gene keys. So it's very, very fascinating. It's definitely a lot to digest and to learn, but we also dove into the specific gene keys, like gene key 10 and 25, I think. You will obviously hear about it. Carrie is amazing. She's also doing some dream work things, some archetypal things, and again, deeply into the iChing, which is a part of human design and also obviously associated with the gene keys. So you will love this episode if you want to learn more about all of these tools. And I will leave you now with this episode. Hopefully see you for the full moon in Aries workshop, and definitely soon on the podcast also with another System of Existence. Welcome back. I'm very excited today because we will have a deep dive that I could not do myself because I'm not an expert in it. Even though I love the iChing, I haven't dipped my toes too far in it. It's part of human design and of the gene keys, which is why the conversation that I'm going to have today with our guest will be very inspiring for a lot of you and open probably no new doorways, new rabbit holes to dive into. And yeah, so I'm really excited to have Carrie Hone today to speak about the I Ching because she's an expert. She's also an expert in astrology and in dreams. So a lot of things to talk about, how all of that is connected to nature, to reality, and what we perceive as reality. And yeah, let's see where we are going with this entire conversation. I'm excited. And yeah, first of all, welcome, Carrie, and thank you so much for being open to talk about all of these things.
Thank you, Kathy. It's nice to meet you, and I appreciate the opportunity to be on your show.
So, Carrie, tell us a little bit about, I want to say your life almost, because you're, I feel like ever since we connected and you wanted to come on to the podcast, I was like, wow, I feel like from your energy, without knowing anything from you, you have so much knowledge and wisdom from your life, but also just from really being a student and like excited about, all of these tools that you use, like specifically the I Ching.
Okay, well, just kind of to wrap it in, I basically began kind of like just understanding dreams. I don't know if it's because I was a poet and dreams are metaphorical, but I just had just sort of this inborn ability to understand sort of the metaphorical language of dreams. And so I kind of got on a path of comparative mythology, comparative religion, history, philosophy. And that's really what I spent my life researching because I wanted to dive deeper into the, dream symbols, and which seem to be pretty universal. A lot of them are universal among cultures. And I've written 7 books, some on dreams, some on the tarot, which is like the Western version of our mythologies, and then the iChing, which is kind of the Eastern oracle that is similar to the tarot in some ways, and in that it can answer questions. But I feel like when you're working with the iChing, it's more like working with a Zen master. The way that it works with you, it sort of puts a lot back on you to take responsibility for why you're in the condition you're in. And so part of the iChing is it comes from the culture of Taoism, which was ancient China, long time ago. Probably they'll trace it back to maybe 500 BC, but I feel like it goes back a lot further. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Tao Te Ching.
I have
So,
heard of it, but I, again,
okay.
haven't dipped my toes into it.
Okay, so the I Ching and the Tao Te Ching are both classics from ancient China, and I have translations of both. And once I started, I had been studying. I probably have a collection of Chinese philosophy that anybody would die to have because
Yeah.
I'm close to Berkeley and San Francisco. And so anytime I would go into used bookstores, I'd grab anything that had to do with Chinese philosophers. So basically when I started to translate the Tao Te Ching, I could see how repetitive some of it was, how it was not always, they attribute it to someone named Lao Tzu, but you can see it's coming from Men Tzu and Wang Tzu, and there's different, and so I had translated the Tao Te Ching first before I approached the I Ching. And again, I was in Chinese philosophy, understanding the archetypes because I was trying to get the big picture of how we all dream in the same language.
Mm.
That was kind of what led me to it. But what I think is really beautiful about Taoism is that in the West, as they tried to understand the human condition and everything that was going on, deities and they gave it all human characteristics. Everything was anthropomorphized or whatever. And in ancient China, it was different. They were looking at nature to understand what it could teach them about leadership, being more powerful, success, health. So you've probably heard, like in Taoism, the idea of water, you know, remaining calm. And if you meet an obstacle, water doesn't like slosh around when it hits a dam. It just grows in volume and energy until splash over to the other side, you know. And like trees can teach us about, we don't have to go running around chasing, you know, what we think we need if we just settle down and get rooted and just open to the way that life will take care of us. I mean, it's been doing it since the moment we took our first breath, and our heart's beating while we sleep, and everything's, you know, going on, and we don't even have to think about it. And so life's kind of caring for us in that same way. So I really appreciated the nature angle that comes with Taoism. And so my interpretation of the iChing is based on these ancient philosophers and the, you know, the nature angle. And I think that's why it's the #1 iChing resource on the internet. In fact, if you search free online iChing, you'll end up at Cafe Soul, which is my website.
Yes.
So that's a little bit about me. What about you? No, I'm kidding.
I think
You can
people
see
know
the
enough about me, you know, not in this episode.
well, you can see the Gemini side of me, right? Blah blah.
Yeah, I was like going to interrupt and be like, can we tell that she's a Gemini having written 7 books? Like what? You know? Of
Right.
course. I love it. I mean, yeah, I have Mars and Gemini, so obviously I have a podcast, right? So
Mhm.
I'm good with
That's
that.
the Leo. I think the Leo
That's
Capricorn
true.
for you.
That's
Yeah.
true. That's true. Tell us actually, because obviously everyone who listens is into astrology as well. So tell us your top 3.
You mean rising and moon and sun?
Yes.
Yeah. So I have an Aries rising and Aries moon with the Gemini sun. But
Mm.
I have a grand water trine between, you know, the moon, Uranus, or Jupiter, Neptune, Venus in water signs. So I feel like that gives me a lot of this work that I do in dreams, obviously, a
Yes.
grand water trine and poetry and Jupiter trine Venus, trine Neptune. So those are the 3 that are involved in the grand trine. So a lot of the healing work. And in my chart, Venus is right on the nadir. I don't know how familiar you are with the nadir, the Imicolon, the beginning of the 4th house.
Oh yeah, the IC basically.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, it's
exactly.
called it's the nadir, and to me, it's a very important part of a chart. You know, if I ever see planets on that angle, I know that this person has a real soulful connection to that planetary energy. And for me, I have Venus there shooting out into the grand trine, and I feel like that's why I'm led to do so much, you know, healing work with others. Why I
Yeah.
can sort of get in their space and know what's going on and all that. So.
Yeah, I mean the IC, that's where I have all of my Aries, you know, Aries energy.
Um,
You're basically in my IC.
yeah.
I love that.
Right.
Yeah, actually, that's a good way to start because I was just mentioning Aries, and I thought it was interesting that you wanted to talk about, you know, how in human design and the gene keys, there are also the hexagrams of the iChing embedded, and you wanted to
Mhm.
talk about the cardinal points, which basically Aries, yeah, Capricorn, can no, which
Cancer.
pieces did you want to talk about?
So when I look at the, you know, the picture of where the hexagrams lay out along it looks like the 360-degree wheel, what would be a zodiac chart is
Yeah, but that's
where,
like
yeah,
I'm always like thinking about the gene keys right now, but you refer to the entire wheel that we see all
right,
around the human design chart, for example, and then
right, right,
the zodiac is embedded to specific gene keys and hexagrams, and that's what you want to talk
right,
about. And you
right.
were mentioning that
So
what stood out to you were specific points, and I'm gonna let you explain why that stood out to you.
okay. So what I'm saying is then what would be like the first degree of Aries, or that angle, let's call them angles just so we don't get, you know, the angle of the ascendant, descendant, midheaven, and the nadir or IC, have the hexagram. So there's 64 hexagrams, obviously, but that the hexagram that goes with the ascendant is 25.
And
And
can I just interrupt for a second? I think it's very interesting. You wanted to talk about the Aries point, right? And then you wanted to talk about the Cancer point, the Capricorn point, and essentially the Which one as well?
Libra.
Libra, exactly. And I think it's very interesting that you wanted to talk about these things with me, not to be too Leo here, but 25, hexagram 25 is my core wound in the gene keys and also my north in human design. And then, no, my north node, sorry, in human design is actually hexagram 10, which is the Capricorn point that you also
Right.
want to talk about. And then my south node obviously is 15, which is the
Okay,
Cancer
awesome.
point. And
Okay.
yeah, so, and my blind
And then
spot, I guess,
46.
is
Yeah,
46.
so if you just visualize with me, the wheel, innocence sort of like is the hexagram from the iching that would describe the ascendant point, the point
Yes.
not for everybody, but just in general. And 25 is one of my favorite hexagrams in the
It's,
iching.
I mean, you have no idea because it's my core wound how much time I've spent with like this specific gene key, hexagon, however you want to say
Okay.
that. And I also think like every time I think it's very fitting that it is the beginning point because it's the ultimate, the core wound here would be separation, right?
Hmm.
It's like when we enter this physical dimension, that we feel that sense of separateness, which is an illusion, but it makes us feel, I mean, I'm just going to explain it from a human design perspective or gene keys, that, the opposite, which is love of the body, 46, we don't, like in my case, it's a very personal story too. I can't love my body because I feel like it's a trap. It limits me, it's constricting this physical dimension, all the constructs, time, this entire matrix, whatever you want to call it, it's all constricting me from being a spirit. Like I had so many moments in my life, even during dreams, where I've just felt like I'm trapped because my soul is so much bigger than what I can fit into this body. Does that make sense?
Yep. So yeah, so that well, the part I'm going to play today with you is just to bring a little bit of a little information about the hexagram,
Yes, please.
because what I like about 25, and you may not see it, you may not know this, right? Like, because you're looking at it from the gene keys and the information that's coming from there. But, the history or the way that we understand 25, there's a saying in Taoism, or you'll hear them refer to the baby who has not yet learned to smile.
Oh,
There's when you think of like Taoism, it's a philosophy of removing boundaries so that you're not different from everything that you see around you. Certainly other people, the tree, the way you share your breath with, the trees breathing. And, Taoism is this way of like just, being in flow, constant flow in the moment that keeps moving, but it's not changing it, as much as you think, so innocence is a really important hexagram that teaches us how to hover at the threshold of perception. So I always tell people, like, get just to where, you're looking out of your eyes, you're about to go over your nose, but don't stay right there.
mm,
Don't embroil, don't push, don't demand, don't do anything, just observe, just be quiet and observe. And that innocence is that, because when I say a baby who's not yet learned to smile, that's a reaction. And
yeah,
that reaction grows as we develop over time to, where we start actually trying to change what our vision of our life looks like. We get too beyond ourselves, and then we have to be led back to our center, which can be a painful process. But, so like, respond, but don't react, or observe, but don't embroil. And so innocence is really, a hexagram that's teaching us about how to be more accepting because we're not expecting. Did those two words come out clear? We accept because we're not expecting,
yeah.
and how not to push and all that. So yeah, where you're describing from Gene Key's human design, whatever, the sense of the dying away, what happens when we are, obviously there's the incarnate point. We might think of the ascendant, but we also see that when we come into a room and we don't know anybody, we're more of our ascendant than we are our sun sign. Our sun
Mm,
sign kind of comes out later. And so there's this sort of like innocence there. There's the ascendant is also when you think of being, born into this universe, ascendant is where, the sun is on the horizon at that moment, can be anywhere. And so it's sort of it's like I want to call it like a possible shadow that can be brought and converted to light,
Yeah.
and all that requires kind of a sense of following and, being with life in its moment of unfolding. So that's kind of 25, and that sets the place for uh the ascendant. One thing, I wrote a book about Babylonian astrology.
Oh, I love
Deco
that. I've just recently really looked into it more because one of a very good astrologer that I know is talking a lot about it. So yeah,
yeah.
I mean, not that I know a lot about it, but before you go into that, I just wanted to kind of like go into like the meaning of, for all of us, why, when that's the Aries point, or the starting point and the start of life, essentially, or the start of anything, it's initiation, Aries, right? That
Well,
me,
not necessarily.
not
Not
necessarily, but
necessarily.
if we see it from that perspective of,
Hmm.
Aries is the start of the
Hmm.
zodiac, the start of life. And
Hmm.
if that's embedded in 25 and everything that you were just describing, wouldn't that
Hmm.
suggest that, it would be helpful for all of us to approach new situations or life in general with that kind of attitude?
Well, it wouldn't just, yeah, I mean, definitely, in a sense, like I said, is a principle that I teach at my students who are learning Taoism. It's a
Mhm.
very important perceptive ability. Like, it can, if somebody really wants to know what it's like to be in flow, innocence is a really important aspect, just as tranquility and disturbance, how to go through like the difficult thing without, being reactionary. So there's like kind of a lot of principles that you'd apply. But what I see in the ascendant isn't necessarily just, you're born into this world, even though we see the wheel as such. The ascendant is an active part of us throughout our whole life. And
I always say the descendant to me is the energy that really needs to rise in our consciousness, like in our being,
Mhm,
because it's not really easy. Like
mhm,
most people fall more so into the descendant because of conditioning and everything. And we really have to rise that ascendant energy
right.
in
And
our.
so,
So
yeah,
it's
so
like, it's almost like, okay, we need to actually cultivate that sense of innocence again because of, what we encounter in the world. We kind of lose that. And it's the same, in the Gene Keys, the gift of 25 is exactly what you mentioned, acceptance. So we need to
mhm,
learn to accept ourselves again. We need
right.
to learn to accept life the way it is and unfolds instead of trying to have expectations that you mentioned.
Hmm. Yeah, so then the opposite of the ascendant is the descendant. And this is what I was mentioning with Babylonian astrology. Well, I wrote a book, Decoding the Night Sky, and it was, there's the ideas that became our Western version of astrology, which basically came 1500 years later in Greece. A lot of their mythology came from some of the ideas that were in Sumeria and Babylon that became their astrology. But Libra wasn't a constellation yet. Libra was the claws of the Scorpio, and back then the area that we attribute to Libra was called ravening dogs. So, and,
Wow.
and there's different names, like Cancer wasn't a crab, it was a turtle, and so there's like these different um like the Aries farm worker comes from a poem about the Inanna, who's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
fertility goddess, and I don't know if you've ever read the Epic of Gilgamesh and some of those earlier Sumerian stories, that would
Just
be
this
in kind of
morning, it's so funny. I listened to an audiobook and they were talking a lot about Sumerian texts, and more so because I'm very interested in the DNA and how in the Sumerian texts there's really embedded like how they were genetically engineering things and how that led to some people having two heads and whatever,
Mhm,
like a lot of medical distortions that we see
mhm,
today like that they were talking about that before. So I'm like, I don't know where I can get my hands on Sumerian text, but I need to go into the DNA stuff that they did back then.
Well, their style of writing, first of all, is my favorite. Like the Epic of Gilgamesh, the way that it's written, it's just, it has this like cadence and repetitiveness, and it's so lustful and it's so real. It's like, the story of this Gilgamesh king, god, half god, and he's looking for immortality. In that story, we get the story of Noah. We get the story of the Garden of Eden, the Tower of Babel. There's a lot of stories that evolved into what became the Old Testament that are coming from that ancient Iraq area of the Fertile Crescent. And anyway, Inanna was like the fertility goddess, and the whole idea of harvest was plowing her field. And so there's poetry that's very erotic about, I don't know if I can say this on your show, but like, who will plow my field is basically, and this farm worker, I will plow your field, like it's more of a sexual thing. Like they actually used the word vulva, who will plow my vulva? Like it's very erotic. So there's something very refreshing to go back to 2,500 years ago and read text that they've finally been able to decode and have it be so funny and earthy. And so the reason I bring that up is Aries was the farm worker that's in that poem of Adana when she's, saying, who will plow my field and all that. But anyway, so back to the descendant across from the ascendant. That point is, like you were mentioning, that we tend to project it over to the descendant. There's the idea of the shadow. In fact, when you look at Babylonian astrology, that even though we know Pluto in the 8th house, well, obviously Pluto didn't exist for them back then, but Scorpio and the whole like underworld of the disappearing planets because of their retrograde motion, so we start to see the 7th house as, even though it's going out into the world, it's also where we kind of start digging into the shadow part of what we're not claiming for ourselves. So
I mean, it makes sense because Libra is the mirror energy, and everything that you kind of also suppress in your subconscious, whatever. I always say it's being mirrored back to you in your like in your hologram. So basically, everything you see is a mirror of your subconscious or the stuff that you might not like about yourself. It all comes up, so you can face it again, right? And look in the mirror and be like, okay, maybe there's still stuff that I need to work on.
Yeah. So when you think of that point, it's called pushing upward, and that's kind of exactly what's happening. And if you think of the wheel, as you go from the 6th house, you turn away from this internal journey into an external reflected journey, and pushing upward is kind of how we that's how you would think of 46, the hexagram. And another thing about the hexagrams is that, and you might like this if you really like to drill deep into them. Each hexagram, there's 64 of them. They're composed of 2 trigrams and variations. And then within the hexagram, there's what we call a nuclear hexagram. So if you went to line 2, 3, 4, and then I believe it would be 4, 5, 3, 4, 5.
6, right?
So you know how that works? You know how to get to the nuclear hexagram?
No, sorry.
Is that what you're? Oh, okay. So you'd have 2. So when you take 46, let's say, you have 2, go to line 2, 3, 4, whatever that is, that becomes now the bottom, and then 3, 4, 5 becomes the top. And what hexagram you come to would be 54, propriety. The idea, yeah. So every hexagram, you can learn more about it by understanding the nuclear hexagram, which is the energy that's trying to achieve expression through that hexagram. So, for example, if somebody threw an oracle to get an iChing reading and wanted, to understand, which is kind of what I've done on my site, is I've given the interpretations, taking these kinds of things into account. But so there's always the nuclear hexagram that we would say, okay, pushing upward. There's also this learning to subordinate. So and that's kind of what happens in the 7th house on the descendant. We start putting our own needs aside to accommodate somebody else in our life. And then the other thing that's in a hexagram is the reversed hexagram. And in fact, when you read the I Ching and its interpretations, a lot of times it will say, oh, this is, things come to this, so therefore we're going to have completion, or, they're always referring to the opposite condition or the preceding hexagram. So it's interesting that the Zhonghua, the opposite of 46 is 25.
Yeah.
I think that's quite interesting on that graphic of why they were put in those positions. So I'm just, explaining that. One other thing, did all of that make sense?
I'm a little bit lost within, like, is it for every, like, is it always a specific line, or how do I find a nuclear?
Okay, every hexagram, if you
Yeah.
took it, like let's say the bottom line was open, next line is closed, then it's closed, you
Yeah.
you only consider line 2, 3, 4, 5. So forget line 1 and forget line 6. So 2, 3, 4 become the bottom, and 3, 4, 5 become the top. That creates a new hexagram.
Ah,
That's the nuclear hexagram. And you can see it in every single hexagram. So I call it the Hugua, Hugua, and then the Zhonghua, which is the reverse, is when you invert the hexagram, you get whatever's considered its opposite. So a lot of times, like let's say you got 46 pushing upward in a reading, the action is ascend,
yeah.
and then what we shouldn't do, because the Zongo is like, well, this is what we shouldn't do. This is kind of like takes us back to 25 in a sense. So the idea of pushing upwards is got a little bit more of a thrust to it, right? Like there's a little bit more ego maybe involved, or direction, self-direction. So anyway, so I was just explaining that about the hexagrams. And one thing that most people don't realize about the I Ching is there's a guy, Gottfried Leibniz. I'm probably not pronouncing his name right, Leibniz. He was, I don't know, 17th century scientist who basically came up with our binary code.
Mm.
So when you think of the ones and zeros that fund all of our technology, whether
Yeah.
it's the internet,
Literally what I was listening to this morning in that audiobook that I mentioned. That's wild that you even mentioned it, because they were referring to how that's embedded in technology and obviously also our genes. So yeah, go
uh-huh,
ahead.
right, right. So basically, he was inspired by the I Ching to create our binary code. So we're talking something, our binary code that we call today's modernity or whatever, goes, was basically thought of, by the scientists back in the 1700s or 1600s. Like, and he was then being inspired by something that goes back to, like, 500, 2000 BC, like, the ancient I Ching. And the Chinese language itself came from oracle bones and tortoise shells, where they were doing these, readings that, it sort of started with the I Ching. And anyway, what makes the I Ching is that there's when you throw a coin, let's say, or you're throwing euro stocks, however it is you're getting your reading, there's 4 possible outcomes for every line, and then it takes 6 lines to build a hexagram.
Yeah.
And now I don't know if this is too complicated, but when the lines are old as opposed to new, they're said to be changing. That's why when you do an I Ching reading, it can change from one hexagram into another. Now, have you ever done an I Ching reading before?
No, I think I need
Okay.
to.
Okay. Well, just so you know, on my website at Cafe Soul, there's a section called Oracles, and there's a free I Ching reading. So
Oh,
it
I'm
gives you
gonna
the
link
answer,
that
and
for
it
everyone.
yeah. So anyway, but when you get an I Ching reading, sometimes it will be static, like you'll get 56 unchanging, which is the Wanderer. Sometimes line 2 and 4 will change, which which would give you the reading of 56 Wanderer becoming 23, splitting apart or whatever. Like, so sometimes readings are static, which says, okay, you really need to concentrate on the teachings of this hexagram. Or when it says it's changing to this other one, although people think that one is now and one is the future, it doesn't really work that way. Like, I feel like it uses the lines to bring up two pictures so that you can, put 56 the Wanderer right next to Splitting Apart,
I
which
mean,
is the idea.
I wonder
Yeah.
if it's similar to in human design and also the gene keys, the gene keys are associated, like you have a specific gene key in a specific line, and it tells you
Mhm.
how to approach that specific gene key,
Well,
in
it comes from the I Ching.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm talking just about the I Ching, like what traditionally has been used as an oracle. But yeah, they've basically taken the teachings from the I Ching and incorporated it into the points of the astrology chart, or however they put this picture together of your specific life pattern,
Yeah.
which is a mandala. I mean, you can see it everywhere. You can see it in your dreams. You can see it in the events that you keep confronting day after day. You can see it in an astrology drawing chart, the glyphs, and you can see it in gene keys. You can throw it. That's why I have the oracles on my website, is most people don't remember their dreams. So
Yeah.
they can do a tarot reading, or they can do the I Ching reading that allows them, to kind of have a little conversation with themselves, because synchronicity makes us see what it is we need to see. And if we're willing and open, I think we can get the same guidance that is offered to us in dreams. So back to Leibniz and the binary code. So
Yes.
basically, so these lines, it takes 6 of them to create the hexagram, and so the old lines change into something new. Well, when you think of just the basics, right, the yin and yang line, here's this guy, he's going, how can these people have just taken two things, an open and a closed line, and come up with so many variations? Because there's the answers that come from the I Ching far exceed 64, because every time you get these possibilities for change, you get like a completely different story. So that's what inspired him about moving the lines around, the open and closed lines. That became our binary code. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I'm very much connected to DNA research and stuff like that. And so it's interesting that you say that, because at the end of the day, it's the same thing of the story of creation. We have
Mm-hmm.
like the yin and the yang, the female and the masculine. So however you want
Mm-hmm.
to say that, we have two chromosomes, and they
Mm-hmm.
are just like connecting and multiplying and creating all of these different variations, which is crazy, out of just two things. Two
Mm-hmm.
things, you create so many.
But to take it one step further,
Yeah.
and this is Taoism, that there aren't really two things.
No,
Like,
they are just they come from the
they
same.
are the same, exactly. And a good way to visualize this, I always use electromagnetism, because when we think of how electricity is traveling or propagating itself through space, there's a charge and there's a field. So the charge creates the field, but the field creates the charge that creates the field that creates the charge. So it's propagated, through space. And the magnetism of gravity, the magnetism of electromagnetism, it's still a force. It still has an effect on whatever's coming into it. But I like to use magnetism to describe Tao, how Tao is the one and it shows itself in the two.
I mean, it
So
makes
we
sense. I don't know how familiar you are with Tesla and Walter Russell, which are like
Mhm,
my,
mhm,
I don't want, I mean, kind of say
mhm,
heroes, because they explain to me reality or creation in the most resonant way to me. For me, everything is
mhm,
light, everything is
mhm.
energy,
Exactly.
vibration.
Light,
The way they
light
explain it is
defines light. Yeah, go ahead.
the way they explain it, it's very simple, scientific, but then also very connected to, you know, like, yeah, that understanding that this light is the ultimate light of God, source, the universe, however you want to call it. And it's poetry in that sense, how that light travels and manifests and becomes physical and then moves and creates shapes, orbs, all of these things. It's actually beautiful. But
Mhm,
we are just so stuck in the drama of it and the story of it and the details of how we project that light, and it becomes a specific image and it becomes a specific picture. But yeah, in essence, everything is just electricity and magnetism.
mhm. And light defines our dimension, right? Like
Yeah.
light, everything that's moving in relation to the speed of light is going to define, how dimension appears to us, or how time, moves. And so, so in a sense, when somebody said, "Let there be light," it did sort of like create this 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional with time reality of what we think is, the only thing that life is. But
Yeah.
I think we're starting to see that it's much more in our, relationship. It blows my mind that we still don't understand, death, or in Taoism, death is not like something to be feared. I mean, death is like,
It's
well, everything
transition.
shows.
It's yeah,
Yeah,
it's transition.
and
It's I mean, I always to me death is, I mean, you might connect to that very deeply too. It's an illusion that there even is death. It's just that
right.
we perceive something else. Like it's the
Mm-hmm.
same when you go into a dream state, you're not
Mm-hmm.
dead, you are just
You die
perceiving.
every night. You
Exactly.
die every
In
night.
essence, you die every night if you see it like
Mhm.
that, and you wake up in a different reality and different life in a way every
Mhm.
morning. It's like,
Right.
and when you go to sleep and rest, your consciousness is just focused on something else for a minute, and it's like we
Mhm.
just are so fixated on that every single day we wake up in the same world and reality, but that's actually not true. We wake up in a new situation, a new frame, a new image, not just when we wake up in the morning, but every single second, like with everything we connect with and where our electricity, our DNA, our genes is, even us after this podcast, it's a different reality for us because our
Mhm.
energies mingled and we created new versions of ourselves essentially, and everyone
Right.
listens the same thing.
Mm-hmm. And this might be a good time to touch on dreams. I see dreams as nature's evolutionary mechanism to keep
Hmm.
us evolving, because we're basically, if you think of ego as just the face of our defense mechanisms and survival instincts, we have to have that downtime where ego's not in charge. In fact,
Clear.
when people talk to me about lucid dreaming, I'm like, why do you want to bring ego into the whole place? Because dreaming is such a healing space. Some part of us that knows us better than we know ourselves is guiding us to think about things differently. And yes, when we wake up, we are a little bit different. And what I see I've been doing dream work with people for decades all over the world. And, and what I see is that what we are kind of exploring in dreams then sort of becomes synchronicity maybe a week later, where we have the chance to confront the new idea. And so we're dreaming like 2 weeks, let's say, ahead of the change that's coming into our life. So when we sleep, there's parts of the brain that don't function like they do in the way that we're walking around in daily life. And I like to compare it to the left brain has become very much in control of language. Language is where consciousness kind of develops. And the right brain is all symbolic and holistic. And we dream more in imagery and like the right brain orientation. And the reason we don't remember our dreams is we wake up from that right brain, imagery driven perspective, and shift into the left brain. It doesn't see things the same. So all of that is lost. But whether we remember our dreams or not, they're changing us. I guess that would be, the good news. So I believe that when we do, like, because I've worked with people and listened to their unconscious voice for so long, because I have seen that, it's almost like their dreams are like, oh my God, I'm so glad she found you, because this is what we need to do. This is what we have to focus on. It's like so much information and direction comes from their dreams, even though they can't see it. And I don't, just interpret the dream. I kind of provide a little direction about, what the dream's suggesting to kind of help them through the transition or whatever. But I feel like it may just be that the condition we're in when we let go of the physical expression of ourselves here on this planet might be a little more similar to what's happening when we're dreaming. I don't know. Whatever it is, when we die, I believe it will be, amazing, because life has been amazing, as we journey through it.
Yeah, I mean, it's again like we just realized that it was all actually not as, dramatic as we make it appear. something.
The
Yeah,
survival
survival
side
and
of it.
everything is so like,
Hmm.
I like to come back to, there's a quote that I keep coming back to, like we have to sometimes just remind ourselves that we are on a rock flying in space, paying taxes and making it like the most important thing, that we have value on some paper thing that someone printed on there and set up rules around it. Like we have to like
Right.
put it all into perspective. Like it's not
Hmm.
actually, and I think sometimes, when we go into other realms, we're like laughing at ourselves and be like, why are
Uh-huh.
you so,
That's the fun part, because
yeah,
it's what it is, or the way that science is trying to decode code whatever this place is so ridiculous that it could only be a place that we're, you know, also growing in some other way than just the survival and all the media driven fear programming. And does that, you know what I mean? It's like
yeah, I mean,
it's
it's
so
the, I always say, it's the most fun game that we set up for ourselves. Like it's a really
Mhm,
entertaining movie, if you want to say that. And like even
mhm,
obviously the things that are happening within the last few years, where it's really like comedy, like it's comedy,
mhm,
like the things that we see, where you just have to like think of the stupidity in a way where it's so obvious that there has to be something that is made up. Like, let's be real, it can't be real.
mhm. Yeah, and I mean, and when I'm working with people with their dreams, I can see how the dream is describing how they created reality. Like, not
Ooh.
everybody doesn't see life the same. Like there's a lot of one of the books I wrote, The Mythology of Sleep, like looks at kind of different archetypes, like the warrior or the survivor, or and I take the mythology from a certain region, like warrior Norse mythology, Odin, and maybe the survivor out of Egypt, and I use a lot of the mythology symbols to help understand the journey of that archetype. And so like you might see the what would be like the air sign, Gemini, Aquarius, Libra, uh we see them having dreams that have much more to do with mazes and like the fear of intimacy that might come with like being really in your head, or um so it's kind of like I see how dreams describe how the person has constructed their idea of reality. So when you get to that point, you have to say, well, if dreams are showing it, then we must be constructing our reality. And so that, it is the power of the mind to say that this is my life and my life can only be that. It's really sticky,
Yeah,
so we have to be really conscious about what that's where innocence, back to the ascendant
yeah,
25, that's where, like, look, let me not jump to any conclusions, because you know what? Nobody knows anything. Thousands of years on this planet trying to figure it out. And you know what? It changes. I mean, everything Newton thought with gravity was totally, broken apart by Einstein's idea of what gravity is. It's basically the bending of space. It's not necessarily a force inherent in the earth. And things that we think are so solid, can change. So why don't we just let go and be here now? Like Ram Dass. Did you ever hear of Ram Dass?
of
Is that
course.
way it's
Yeah,
okay? Because I love him.
me too.
um,
Like
yeah.
it's like again, like taking it with a sense of lightness. And I mean, you're Gemini, and we're Gemini season. Literally, as we record, we have the Gemini Venus star point happening too. And it's very much, that I even
Hmm.
explained that on, I think, this week's forecast, where it's like, Sagittarius think that this is the ultimate truth, right? Opposite sign. And that what I appreciate about it, Gemini, it's just now I can see it from the other side too. Yeah, it could be that, but it could also be that. Or a third option, let's stay curious. Like, let's stay
Right.
curious and investigate more, because we are eternal students here.
Right. And the innocence, 25, that whole idea of not going past your nose, like stay there and just watch. And,
Yeah.
you can really cultivate joy and laughter and comedy. Like you said, if you can describe the last few years in a comical way, well, that's a lot, because there's a lot of people that are angry,
I
that
know.
think the world's ending, or, and for thousands of years, life has been very chaotic. It's just part of the human experience, I guess. But So yeah, I definitely think that. So the other 2 points, because we talked about
Yeah, I
46
was just
pushing
about
upward.
to say, because it's very fitting, gene key, or like
Mhm,
the next one we want to talk about is 10, which is my north node. So I'm also very connected to that one. And I mean, in the gene keys and human design, it's all about self-love and
mhm,
being, like beingness. So I
uh-huh.
wonder how you see that as the
Well,
starting.
it's called, yeah, 10 is called treading
Yeah.
in the iching, and it's basically an image of a child riding, let's say, some sort of energy and poking at it, and rather than getting mad, it's the energy is kind of looking back in amusement that the child is, you know, thinks it so, like, it doesn't realize what's at it, what potential's there for it,
Mhm.
right? That if that north node feels really important for you, I think, with a lot of that Leo energy. Leo I think has a lot of potential if they can just like recognize how to just let themselves, you know, it reminds me of a story from the Epic of Gilgamesh, if you don't mind. I don't
Oh,
know why
I
I want to
love.
throw this at you. Okay. So when Gilgamesh is going through the cedar forest looking for Humbaba, who's basically a shadow character or whatever, and he's got his buddy, yeah, Enkidu, who's kind of more of like his id, they're running through the forest or whatever. He wants to slay Humbaba. That's how he's going to live in immortal. That's how he'll be the hero. And he keeps asking Shamash, his sun god, for dreams. And at some point, he doesn't feel like he's going to ever be able to slay this Humbaba character. So he's like crying to Shamash, "How could you fill my heart with such a desire to accomplish this if you didn't intend for me to do it?" Like,
Mhm.
it's such a Leo archetype to me, because the Leo is so brave, and it's so, the personality is huge in Leo. I mean, because the sun's associated with that sign, and so when you have like the North Node in treading, I feel like you get the sense of how much power do you have before you're poking you know, the deity. How much is the deity, how much power is the deity giving you? Like, there's this like fine line, but what's most important is that you are self-actualizing,
Yeah.
because if the universe can't self-actualize until you self-actualize, each one of us, if any one of us refuses to self-actualize, we're basically putting the brakes on the big picture. Does that make sense?
I mean,
So
that's what I keep preaching. We all came here to be a
uh,
specific color fractal, however you want to say that, or like puzzle piece of the whole image. And if you don't play, like if you're not the image or like the puzzle piece, then the image is broken. Like it's just there's no harmony in the orchestra.
mhm.
It's like there's a tone missing.
Yeah, so by putting 10 up at that point, at the peak of the midheaven, which is like the midheaven gives us a sense of what our career may be like. It's what true north really is. You know what I mean? Like, you describe your north node. I call that, true north, but the sixth house can show us what we're really doing, Dave, in our career or whatever. But the 10th is what we're aspiring to. And planets that are located up near the 10th, the midheaven point, the highest point in the chart, seem to like, I see Neptune up there a lot with spiritual people or doctors, or you might see, uh depending on who's ruled in the house as the zodiac sign, you get sort of the flavor of what the 10th house is. So, but when I was describing that Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero's journey, that 10 energy of treading, so it's like treading on the tail of the tiger, like
Yeah.
you're riding a tiger, so be careful. But because you're riding the tiger, it's pretty powerful. You can go far. Those who don't know what can't be done can accomplish great things.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
If you don't know, then And so then it brings us back to, and this is kind of a good place to finish up the I Ching portion of Gene Keys or Human Design. The 15 is at the nadir point. And how would you describe 15 before I describe it from the I Ching? What would you say of 15?
I mean, it's I always connect very deeply to it as that extreme element that I definitely need to let go of. Like I'm very much an extreme character, and yeah, it sometimes leads you into like very dark places, but then also very high places. But the middle of it, which is interesting, is magnetism. So it's this idea also about, you know, what we talked earlier, like one polarity to the other, but in the middle, in the zero ground where you balance it out, it's that magnetism point, right? It's where you connect back to center.
Hmm. So what I see as 15 is I call authenticity.
Mm.
So like there's a lot of ideas that come out of ancient Chinese philosophy that that things can happen to return us to original sincerity. And I like how they call it original sincerity because as we go through life, we try to be this, we try to be that, and then we come home and
Yeah.
that's who we are. Like we see it.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I kind of mean. You know, you go from one extreme to the other and you explore all different kind of
Mm-hmm,
like facets, but then at the end of the day you center yourself and like, oh no, that's actually me. And that makes
mm-hmm,
sense when you say it's authenticity, right?
mm-hmm. And then the nuclear hexagram of authenticity is liberation, which has the code word untangle. Like so it's exactly as you're saying, like we come back from our hero's journey, and then we have to kind of get back to who we really are. So in astrology, that point, the nadir, if I'll see Saturn there when a person, like I actually know a woman who's a yoga teacher who, if she could have one of those things that the monks used to like hit their backs with, that would self-punishing, or hair shirts they called them, or like I could see her doing that because she's so into Shiva or Christian, I don't know, whatever it is that she's doing spiritually. There's a lot of discipline and
Mm.
self-flagellation, and she has Saturn on the nadir. So I see like the nadir a lot of times when a planet's there, you have the sense that that planet is really important at a very deep level, in describing what's kind of motivating someone. So we think of the beginning of the fourth house as the nadir, right? And
Yeah.
it starts to describe what feels like comfort, what the house is like on the inside, not what we're showing the neighbors in our flower garden. What is it that's really going on internally?
Yeah.
And that's that point. So I love that they put 15 there. And then again, the opposite of 15 is 10, which is the opposite on the descendant. I
Yeah.
mean, the
Yeah.
midheaven.
Yeah.
Yeah. The midheaven and nadir are across from each other. So the fourth and 10th house. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. I don't do a lot with those. Like I said, I do astrology and iching stuff, but I haven't like put them together the way you are with your gene keys, or so it's
Yeah, I
kind of
mean, I love it.
interesting.
It was a really interesting, yeah, because it is at the end of the day the cross of matter, right? That we were just
Hmm.
talking about. So how everything is being manifested, and I think everyone could kind of connect and relate to everything that we were just describing, even if you don't have 25 or 46 or 10 or
Hmm.
15, it's still the energy that activates or like that is embedded in that cross of matter for everyone. You know, it doesn't matter.
Hmm.
Oh, it doesn't matter. How much
Well,
can we
let
about matter, right? So
Well,
yeah,
let me ask you, because I'm sure maybe your listeners already know this, but I don't really. Am I right to assume that these points on the 360 wheel that then that resonate to that I Ching hexagram come from the placement of the planets in your chart? Like if you had something at 7 degrees Cancer, and
exactly, exactly. Yeah,
okay,
that's
yeah.
how it works. So basically, in human design or also in the gene keys, you work also with the same like birthday, birth time, and location. And then that's why I love to work with human design because it gives me an idea how to approach a specific planet in your birth chart, like which gene key is embedded in that, specific planet. For example, if you have, yeah, as you said, like Saturn at 7 degrees of Aries. Okay, then that must mean your Saturn is in gene key XYZ, and then we have to see, okay, how to approach that Saturn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it just so basically, it shouldn't confuse the. I mean, it seems like trying to understand your gene keys or human design or whatever would be complicated enough. But the I Ching is a great resource on its own,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly. I mean,
to bring
it
back.
doesn't, I mean, it's just an extension, you know, no one has to go into all different systems in order to understand it, you know. You don't have
Hmm.
to understand the chakras to to the core in order to understand your human design, even though it's part of it, right? You
Hmm.
don't
Right.
have to study astrology to the core in order to understand your human design either. That's also why you obviously work with specific people that are, you know, focusing on that. So yeah,
Hmm.
if you want to know your human design more from an iChing perspective, then you might look into your iChing and then you book an iching reading, right? Or you find
Hmm.
someone who does both, you know, it's
Hmm.
like just preference.
The I Ching reading is based mostly like on the now.
Yeah.
So where the might give you kind of like your life path description, you could, you know, use the I Ching to say, what is it that I'm not getting this week? What should I focus on as I move towards that? Or, you know, and it can be, and like I said, if you have you ever done a tarot reading? Tarot, I think they call
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
but I
sure.
call it tarot.
Yeah.
Okay, so tarot gives like a really not black and white, but it can be really gives a definitive answer where the I Ching makes you kind of wonder. Like it doesn't, you know,
I
it'll
love
lay
that.
out
And you
the.
know, the founder of the Gene Keys, Richard Rudd, and that's what I love about him because he's not putting it necessarily into a box. It's more like an invitation to contemplate, you know, and
Hmm.
that sounds like very much what you were just saying too. It's like you walk away from an I Ching reading to really reflect and contemplate
Hmm.
and then, you know, have your own realizations, you know, your
And
own
and
epiphanies.
what's exactly, and then what's kind of interesting is when I'm working with a client, I do a lot of like virtual work with people, whether live or through email. That if they submit a dream, I always ask them to pull an I Ching reading too. It's always says the same thing. It blows my mind. So
Mm.
that's why I'm very confident that, you know, people write all the time, thank you, your oracles, blah, 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 you know, so I'm confident that when the person meets the oracle, it talks to them in the way that they need to hear, you know, in the same way that if they could remember their dream, you know, that they would be getting the same kind of guidance.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. So tell us, to wrap it up, how do you work with people, or where can people find you if they want to go deeper? Um, do a little like spiel of like what's going on, like how could we work with you, or
Mhm.
do you offer anything specifically you think would help people specifically during these crazy times that we're in?
Yeah. So I would say, you know, Cafe Soul, which you'll probably have a link in your thing
Yes.
maybe, but Cafe, CAFEAUSOUL. Cafe Soul has oracles, use different oracles. You can just kind of throw a I Ching reading or get a tarot reading. You can contact me there. You can see the different types of, you know, services that I offer, or classes or workshops, whatever. I do a lot of like where I do one dream and one reading a week with somebody as they're going through some kind of transition. I do comprehensive dream work, which takes a lot more time. Um, and then, of course, you can go to Amazon or Google Books or wherever and find, you know, different books that I've written. I wrote about the archetypes behind tarot.
Mm.
I've written about, you know, dream interpretation, like as just a dream dictionary, but also like that one I mentioned before, where if you're serious about learning, you know, how to interpret your dreams, that mythology of sleep would be a good resource. I have, you know, you'll see in my website the videos, Nature is a Guru at YouTube. I always am uploading a video about what nature's teaching us about the human journey,
Um,
Taoism kind of inspired type stuff. So yeah, you know, I'm out there if anybody has a question or,
I
and
love it.
yeah.
I will obviously link everything, and I have a
Uh-huh.
request to wrap it up, if I may.
Okay.
I would love for you to do your books in audio version. I'm like such
Ah,
an audible person. I'm like, I want to read, like, I want to have the knowledge in all of these books, but I'm not a reader.
yeah.
I'm like, can I listen?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe I can hire someone to do that. I'm not, you know what I mean?
I mean, you have an
Like,
idea.
so yeah. Yeah, I know, but I don't want to go. I'm always in the future. I'm Aries. Got a lot of Aries going on. They're not great finishers, right?
Maybe
But
that's a new project to embark on, because I'm pretty sure a lot of people would love, love, love to hear also
oh,
what.
okay. Well, all right. Well, that sounds like a plan. I appreciate that input.
Awesome. Thank you, Carrie. It was a
Thank
very
you.
eye-opening and mind-boggling, and me putting like going into a deep rabbit hole afterwards conversation, which I always love. It inspires me
Uh-huh,
to go deeper into Sumerian texts now, the I Ching
uh-huh.
again, and like yeah, it was really, and I hope it was so inspiring for other people that were listening too. I will link all the resources and all the links to you, obviously in the show notes. And yeah, do you have any final words for the listeners?
I think just what Ram Dass would say, be here now.
Oh,
Just like use that. I think that innocence, use that hexagram to kind of not get pulled into all the stuff that's trying to eat up your consciousness.
I love that a Gemini would say that, like silence the mind and
Hmm.
be here now, right? And we need that in the wildness with Jupiter and Gemini now too. It's like mental
Hmm.
overdrive, right?
Right, right.
So that's a very good reminder. And obviously that means you all plug out of this episode now as well and look at a tree or something,
Good for you.
right? So see you next time. And yeah, we'll speak soon.